Hello guys, welcome back to John's Workshop, and in this video we're going to be doing something a little bit different from what I normally do, and we're going to do a bit of a restoration video. The reason being, I've got one or two bits in the workshop that I've had kicking around for a long time, stuff that I've picked up over the years that was being thrown away, and I just couldn't bear to see things like that just going a skip, so I went through the proper routes, and these have come out of industry, by the way, out of a big manufacturer and that I used to work at, and these things were being thrown away as part of a tidy up in inverted commas, where lots and lots of very expensive equipment just gets hoofed in a skip and sent away. So I did what I thought at the time was the right thing, thinking one of these days I'll use that, or I'll make use of it, and a couple of the bits, it's quite obvious that are far too big for what I need and what I'm ever going to use, and as a result of that, and a result of the dampness that I suffer in the winter in this workshop, they're just degrading and getting worse and worse, so they might as well have gone in the skip. So, and I'm not comfortable with that, so I'll bring you in at the bench and we'll show you the bit that we're going to be focusing our attention on in this video, and once it's complete I will be listing it up on eBay to sell it to somebody who can hopefully make use of it. So I'll bring you in at the bench and we'll have a look at what we've got. Right then guys, this is what we're talking about. So this is a Chesterman height gauge, and the reason I'll try and step out of view, the reason I've got it horizontal on the bench is because if I try and stand it vertical it hits the ceiling by a long way. So this is a probably 42.5 inch long, and for our metric friends that's 1.6, 1.7, is that right? No, sorry, 1.06, 1.07 meters. So it's a massive, great big thing. It is a Chesterman. It's got Vernier scales on both sides, it's got locks, it's got a quick release for disengaging the threads, it's got a coarse feed wheel at the top, I think you can just see my hand on, and right down at the bottom here there's a real fine feed wheel. So quite a lot of features on it. It's quite an old bit of kit. As I said, it's Chesterman, it won't have been cheap when it was new. You can see the state of it, it's in pretty horrendous condition. What I have done is just very quickly, I've just had a test at one of the worst parts on it, just to see how bad the pitting was under the rust, to see whether this thing was actually worth saving or not, and as it turns out it actually is. The pitting's not too bad and you can still see all the graduations quite well. Let's see if I can zoom you in on that. So yeah, there we go. You can see the big sort of graduations, the big numbers. These are centimeters or millimeters, and then you can see the fine graduations of millimeters in there. So I think this will, and that was one of the worst bits. So I think this will clean up okay. So I think the first job, let me just zoom back out. The first job I'm going to do is take all of this unit here to bits before I start trying to move it anywhere, because obviously if I start trying to move this at the minute, it's just going to be moving it on over the top of all this rust. So we'll take that. I think the easiest way to do this is take the whole thing apart, give it a clean up to get rid of the worst of the dust and the mess, and then we'll then start tackling the individual features, giving them a clean up. I'll just show you the base unit. So you can see the base there. You can see what we're dealing with. This most of this rubbish is from being sat in my workshop, but covered in rust, absolutely red rusty. And as I said, it's got this fine feed wheel. There's like a plate underneath that covers up the gearing on the bottom of the thread, and there's a thread that's pitched all the way up the back here, which we'll just turn that over actually and have a look. I'll just reposition the camera again. So you can see the thread here. So this is an Acme thread, don't know the pitch, don't know the diameter, and actually the thread itself is not in too bad a condition for the most part. It's a little bit grotty down at the bottom, so yeah, you can see down here the rust has got a lot more hold of it, and that will have happened in my workshop because that's been down near the floor where the worst of the damp is. So we'll set about taking it apart and I'll bring you back through some of that process. Well, that's interesting, I missed that. There's some real chances of that getting lost. That's a tiny little woodruff key, so we need to be careful with where I drop that. What a really nice bit of engineering that is. So a pair of spring-loaded half nuts, which is the quick release mechanism on the threaded shaft. There's a lot of work and time gone into making that, and hence why this would have been expensive when it was new. And there's a lock-in strip in there that sits up against the two locking screws here, the thumb screws for locking this up at a fixed dimension. So we'll take most of that apart and give it a clean up. This bit's fairly good actually because it's been out of the muck so much, but we'll clean it all up while we're at it. Right guys, I've stripped this back probably as far as I'm going to do. There's a tiniest taper roll pin in here. Well, I think it's a roll pin, I can't really see, it's so small, it's about 40th diameter maybe. It might just even be just like a wire pin or something that's holding this thumb wheel on. I'm not going to get that out without either drilling it out, making a mess of it. So I'm just going to leave that where it is and we'll clean that up as it is. Also there's some screws in the back here for dismantling the base section from the actual upright piece. I'm leaving all that together as well, I'm not messing with that. So we're just going to clean the rest of it up in that state and then we'll start rebuilding around those bits that I've not stripped down. Alright then guys, we've got the worst of the grease. This is absolutely solid, this grease. It must have been in here for donkey's years. And I've got all my bits and pieces in a plastic pot so I can't lose anything. So we're going to now start on this frame. What I have just quickly done, and I'll move the camera, but in here there was some black paint that was all lifted off with the rust. I've just been through with a wire brush gently, just in there, taken that black paint out and just cleaned the worst of that, so I can now start on the actual metalwork, cleaning the metalwork up. So we'll start with some Scotch-Brite on here, and I'm basically going to just do it all this side up if you like. So I'm going to clean the bench down a little bit, give myself a bit of working space, and then we'll start just with oil and a bit of green Scotch-Brite, working our way down the metal surfaces and see how they come up. There you go guys, a quick rough. I've got some more coarse Scotch-Brite just to take the worst off. There's a bit more work to do on this face yet, but you can see there the patent number, Chesterman, Sheffield, England, and it's number 369. Now whether that's the model or whether that's the serial number, not really sure. Fortunately, now I've taken the wheel off the top, I can just sit this on my bench and I've got about 1/4 inch clearance off the ceiling. And you can also see there, probably just in shot, let me just move the camera, so a bit of a clue where it's come from. And you can also see there that this was last calibrated on either the 25th or the 15th, not sure which, of April 2007. So it's been out of calibration for just a little bit longer than it probably should have been. I'm going to remove that because that's not relevant to where it's going to be going and finishing up life, because it's not staying with me. This hopefully will get it to a home where it can be used. So we'll take that off as part of the cleanup. So I'll keep going and bring you back as we get further into it. Alright then guys, we've cleaned this bottom piece up, and as you can see there's quite some heavy pitting, and this was like this, well, it's got worse since I've owned it definitely, but this was definitely like this when I picked it up. This had been stood in an old shed, in an old hangar on an airfield for many years, unused, and that's why it was being thrown away. So it is pitted, but I've been around that with an oil stone. You know, it's not ideal. It certainly wouldn't be any good for precision measurements, but at the end of the day it's a Vernier scale. You're only going to be ever as good as a Vernier scale accuracy. This would still be perfectly adequate in a fabrication type shop or something like that where they want to use something for marking out. Interestingly, as I've cleaned out this well where the gears sit, it looks like it's been silver soldered at some point. I know whether that's from the original manufacturer or whether that's been done at some point in service to try and bring it back into calibration or something, really don't know, but there's definitely some silver solder. I think it's silver solder. Having said that, it's quite soft, it could be soft soldered, and that may have been done to try and bring this back into calibration or something at some point, really don't know. But anyway, we've got it cleaned up as good as it's going to get. I'm not going to spend any more time or effort on that. I was thinking about stripping it all down, putting this on the surface grinder, regrinding this bottom face, and then setting it all back together again, and then regrinding the actual height piece to suit. But there's a lot of work and effort in that. If I was keeping it for myself, I'd probably do that, but for what this is as a clean up, I'm not going to bother with that. It's perfectly okay for a rough vernier height gauge. It will be perfectly fine despite this pitting. I'll bring you back when we start concentrating on the main stem. Alright guys, I've gone about as far as I'm going with this base. Just thought it was worth showing, and I don't know whether this is a Chesterman thing or whether this is something that's had done to it during its life. I really don't know, but if you can see that, there's some really sort of interesting scroll patterns that have been put into this base plate here. Very strange, never seen that on a bit of measurement gear before. It may be just a Chesterman thing, don't know. So if I zoom out a bit, that's the extent of the base. And excuse the tripod noise, and I'll try and just zoom up the length of it. It'll probably blow out with the light up there if I go any higher, but you can see there that's looking pretty reasonable. There we are, that's as good as that bit's going to get. Come up very well actually. The business end, there's no pitting on there. A bit of slight discoloration, but no pitting, and that's really come up quite nicely across its all its surfaces. So happy with that. We'll move on to the mating component that we took off a few minutes ago. Interesting, the contrast. We've just gone from one to the other in about 15 minutes of hard work with some Scotch-Brite. So we'll get that other piece done the same, and then we'll reassemble those half nuts back onto there. Alright guys, we've got all these bits cleaned up, ready for reassembly. So I'm just going to put a tiny bit of oil, probably too much. Right guys, it's time to start the reassembly. So we've got the lead screw cleaned up all the way along. We've got a little key back in, if you can see that. A tiny little woodruff key. So I've decided I'm not painting. I'll leave it as original in this back, in this back trough. I'm just going to leave it. So hopefully Right guys, we've refitted the gear, the nut, the washer, and we've just lightly greased that. And that's all nice and free now on the adjusting wheel. So what we're going to do now is pop the bottom plate back on. Now this was painted, well, originally painted black, but yeah, it was, most of it had come off and the bits that hadn't were pretty scaly, so I've just cleaned it right back to brass, which will be fine for what it is. So we'll just drop that in there, hopefully find the right screws. Alright then guys, we're on the mill table. I'm 7 inches, 6 inches clear of the ceiling, and excuse the tripod noise. I pan down, all the way down. You can see we've got it set up there on the mill. And what I've tried to do is calibrate it best I can. Now obviously this isn't an inspection grade table, it's a milling machine table, and these are inspection grade slips. They are old slips that were probably decommissioned because they're a couple of tenths out of calibration or something. So you know, by no means is this a pucker calibration, but I'll just reposition the camera a bit closer in at that bottom end, and I'll show you what I've done. So what we've got there is 3-inch slips, so a 2-inch and a 1-inch, and I've got that so it's just, you know, just a sliding fit under there. We know this is 0.740 of an inch because that's what it says on it, so we've got 3.740. And if I show you, so this starts at 3-inch, this caliper, sorry, this vernier. So I'll try and show you the imperial side now and show you what it's reading. Quite hard to get this to focus, but you can see there we've got 3.7 just under the 50 mark on the 0. And then if I pan up the scale, we're looking for 3.740. I don't know whether I'll be able to get any closer in. Is it going to focus? Nope. think you can just about see there the 40 lines lined up just about. It might be slightly above, but it's about lined up with a 7, so 3.740. And what I've done on the metric side is I've converted that to metric, and I've calibrated the metric side in to the right numbers as well. So I'll just bring you back a little bit further out. So you can see there we've got our quick release up and down, all the way up and down. We've got a reasonably fast movement at the top, and we've got our fine feed at the bottom for fine adjustment. So I hope that shows that when something looks like it's completely beyond saving, with a bit of time, effort and energy, you can bring things back from what look to be beyond repair. So that's as far as I'm going with this. That's now going to get advertised in its current state, and I think what I've shown there is, yes, I can't calibrate it properly with the gear I've got, but it's calibratable, so it's within range. It could still be calibrated by someone who's got all the right gear. So I know that was a little bit different from what I normally do. Hope you found that interesting. I've got some mucky hands that are going to take a while to clean up, and we will catch you all very soon on another video when we'll be making something else.